think I can. Mm. Okay. Because we volunteer in the past. We did it in February of last year.
Mhm. Mm-mm. This is all I've got. You say that.
Like, you talking?
Hmm.
Like,
I don't know.
what's the red?
McCartan.
Oh, there, I can hear you.
Oh, good. Great.
you.
Yes, we'd love, the public comment period is open and we'd love to hear from you.
Well, I don't think I have anything to add other than what's in my application. If you have any questions, I could try to answer them.
No, thank you. It's straightforward and there is another offenses. Offenses is a pretty good thing to put. It doesn't really harm fish habitat. It's you don't. It's not like an asphalt driveway. So I think we'll be easy peasy. Thank you for coming tonight, though.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there any other members of the public who wish to make a comment? Is there anyone else? No? Okay, just the four of us. Okay. If there's no one else wishing to speak on this item, the public comment period is now closed. Are there any commissioner comments or questions for staff?
Madam Chair, when you look at figure one, the access from Keystone, it looks like the property line goes right down almost the middle of the driveway. Is that just what I'm seeing?
Yeah, I wondered the same thing.
Okay, so there's no issue with the fence and the access. And does the party own both pieces of property on either side of that, or just the one?
They
Just the
do,
one?
they do not. They only own 1085 Keystone Drive. It is a shared driveway, but it does look like prior to where the area where the fence is installed, that there is access to that shared driveway from both parties.
Okay, well, that takes care of it. Thank you.
And we do have Dick on the line, so if he would like to add to that comment about the shared driveway, please.
Originally, the owner of the of 1077 owned our lot. We purchased that lot from the owner at that time, and his driveway actually came in on our lot and then curved over to his lot. And so as part of the sale agreement, he had to move his driveway off of our property. This fence will be at least 100 feet away from where the short piece of shared driveway is. Shouldn't affect that at all.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments for staff on this item?
Commissioner Burton, just a clarification on the vegetation that is being removed. It looked like from the pictures, there weren't any trees in that 25-foot square area that is to be removed. I'm just curious if that is the case.
And thank you. I can show that area. It's it would extend, so this is about 105 feet, so this is approximately a little bit closer than, the fence would go through this post right here, and then it would extend down to about this metal post right here. I can enlarge that a little bit. So it doesn't appear there's no trees. There might just be grasses and that type of brush for vegetation.
Okay, thank you. Follow-up question. when vegetation is removed in the Kenai River Overlay District, if a tree or a group of trees are removed, when that vegetation is reestablished, does the applicant or whoever is applying, for the, whatever project is being done, do they have to match that, any trees that are removed, do they have to match that number of trees, or is it just any vegetation they want to replace whatever was removed?
Through the chair, it depends on the permit application. Your commission has seen different conditional use permits for entire houses that have removed trees, and no trees were replaced in that instance. As well as last year, there was I don't know if you remember, there's a gazebo with a deck that was in the Kenai River Overlay District. They also removed a tree, and that wasn't required to be replaced.
Can I comment?
Please.
So when we bought this piece of property, the area that we're talking about where the fence is going to be built was the prior owner's parking lot. So as far as vegetation, it was gravel. He put down ground cloth and had 2 foot of gravel on top of it. So the only vegetation really in that area is what's come up since then. It's been, dandelions and horsetail fern and stuff. It's just whatever is naturally revegetated. That's the only vegetation there. And we're just going to put 4 post holes in. There's going to be 4 posts, so I can't imagine that we would disturb 25 square feet of ground, but that's possible.
Thanks for the additional info. All right, are there any other questions or comments for staff? All right, seeing none, let's call for the roll or the vote, excuse me.
Commissioner Murray,
Yes.
Commissioner Turner,
Yes.
Commissioner Burton,
Yes.
Smithwick and Anderson are still absent. Chair Vadla,
Yes.
motion passed. You have 4 yeses and 0 nos. Motion passes.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. and Mrs. McCartan, for joining us tonight and for your application.
Thank you very much for your service. Have a safe trip home tonight.
Thank you. Yeah. All right, moving on to second public hearing item, Resolution PZ 2025-002, granting a conditional use permit for the construction of 2 decks within the Kenai River Overlay District at 821 River Estates Drive. May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. May we have a staff report, please?
Your second resolution is in another conditional use permit within the Kenai River Overlay District. This one is a little bit more complex. There are 2 decks being proposed. The first deck is attached to the single-family residential dwelling. There's currently a deck there. It's a little bit smaller and it's in need of some repair. So the applicant is proposing to construct a 1,192 square foot deck replacement. There would be a portion of this deck that would extend into the Kenai or into the anadromous habitat district, the 50-foot setback from the borough. And that would just be this portion of stairs right here. And so you'll hear us talk about that in a little bit. The second deck is attached to a detached garage structure that has a mother-in-law apartment. It's a 2-story deck and it would be 282 square feet. And it would be about 84 square feet or 84 linear feet from ordinary high water. We look typically at the general standards. This property is within the rural residential district and the standards for minimum yard setbacks are met for both of the decks. Looking at our zoning code for the Kenai River Overlay District, for the first deck, which is attached to the residential dwelling, at its closest point, it will be 45 feet from ordinary high water mark. And again, that'll just be this area of stairs. These stairs will be made from elevated light penetrating materials, which is consistent with the Kenai Peninsula Borough Habitat Permit. The second deck at its closest will be 84 feet from ordinary high water. It'll be about 282 square feet. Yeah. One more after this.
Forward. Yeah,
Or
okay,
this one.
yeah. The number one, this is it. Go further again. No, another one, another one. There we go. Deck number one, 45 feet from the ordinary high water mark. The current deck they have, how close is that to the OHW?
It is, I can show you a picture real quick.
Were you gonna get to that in your?
No, I actually don't have those pictures in the deck, but I think on the current deck is right at that the 50-foot mark. It's a little bit, maybe it's 55, 60 feet. There is some gap. The borough does have that 50-foot mark staked right now. So when we went out on site visit, we were able to see so the current deck is not within the borough's anadromous habitat setback. I do not know how big the current deck is. I'm sorry.
Sorry, we can also wait. Maybe time for questions and comments after your staff report.
And I might be able to do a quick calculation. The clearing of native and non-native vegetation may occur within the proposed sites of the construction of these two decks. No excavation work is planned as this plan set calls for Tecmo posts to be installed. There may be some damage to vegetation just due to the compact machinery that will install those posts. The applicant will not remove vegetation any closer than the 50-foot mark from ordinary high water, and the applicant will not remove vegetation in excess of 500 square feet. So I believe in my calculation, sorry, Caitlin, I didn't have this in there, but that it might just be expanding by 500 square feet is the change, or approximately. Any disturbance to existing vegetation will be revegetated. And again, we go through the 8 specific standards for the conditional use permit. The first one is that the proposed development satisfies the specific standards associated with that conditional use listed in the code. The proposed decks are consistent with and in harmony with the intent of the rural residential district, with mitigation measures in place during the drilling of the Tecmo posts and with revegetation of the disturbed areas. We believe that the standards of the Kenai River Overlay District are met. Additionally, there is required noticing again of the Kenai River Center and Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation, which staff did complete. The southern steps that are attached to the deck, again, are 45 feet from ordinary high water, and due to that encroachment within the 50-foot habitat protection district, the borough does need to permit that, which they completed on December 19th. That permit calls for elevated light penetrating structure of those steps. The second standard is that the harmony is or the use is in harmony with the comprehensive plan. This area is considered suburban residential in the future land use map, and this designation is for areas that are more rural and that are outside of city services at this point in time. The surrounding land uses also have homes, decks, and elevated light penetrating structures. The third standard is that the use meets the general standards of the zoning code and the intent of the zoning code. It's located. These two decks meet the general standards of the zoning for rural residential in the Kenai River Overlay District. Again, staff recommends with mitigation measures that the potential for significant erosion, ground or surface water contamination, or adverse alteration of riparian habitat will be mitigated. The fourth is that the use shall be so located and arranged on the site to avoid significant noise, glare, odor, or other nuisances. Staff finds that's met. The fifth is that the proposed development shall not significantly impair the value of adjoining property. Staff sees no evidence that the deck construction would impair adjoining property values. The sixth is that the decks will not require any additional public services. The seventh is that with the condition mitigation measures, staff does not believe that the granting of the conditional use permit will be harmful to the public safety, health, or welfare. And then finally, we found that no outstanding obligations were owed either to the city or to the borough. And so with this, we have 5 recommendations of, we recommend the passing of the resolution with the 5 conditions. The first is to stabilize and revegetate all disturbed areas or exposed earthwork caused by the project no later than September 1st, 2026. The purpose of this condition is to ensure revegetation occurs and to reduce runoff and erosion potential. The second is no materials may be stored within the borough's 50-foot habitat protection district. The third is construction techniques and best management practices must be utilized to ensure that the project activities do not result in runoff or sedimentations to the Kenai River. The fourth, excavation fill must be deposited at a minimum distance of 100 feet from the closest ordinary high water mark. And finally, a habitat protection district permit or written approval must be obtained prior to any activity within the borough's 50-foot habitat protection district, which the applicant has. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any member of the public tonight with us who would like to comment on this item? Okay. You can press star 9 if you're on your telephone, or raise your hand if you're on Zoom.
Kathy, you are allowed to talk. If you were to unmute yourself, you'd be able to. Perfect.
Thank you.
We can hear you.
I just wanted to let you know that you do have the owners of the property, Russ and Kathy Madison, listening in on Zoom tonight. And can answer any questions that you may have of us.
Thank you so much for being here. All right. If you don't wish to make any comment, we'll officially close the public comment period, but we will, it's not a busy night, so we'll keep it relaxed, and if folks have questions, we can ask them. But I'll close the public comment period for now and move on to any commissioner comments or questions for staff.
Yeah, this is a comment on the borough, not on what we're doing or what we're going to approve, I believe, is the 50-foot setback. Seems like the more I hear, the borough is approving more and more within the 50-foot overlay. And that's a concern to me, but I don't know if we could get that kind of information from the borough. I mean, did they approve in 80% or 10%? Because it just seems to be.
We cannot hear him. I don't know if he's not talking into his speaker or.
You might have to move a little closer to your microphone, and it might also need to be turned on.
It is on.
Okay, thanks.
I'm sorry, Kathy. This is Gary Turner, Commissioner. My concern's not with the city, and it's, my concern is the river overlay district of 50 feet. And yours is going to be 45 feet or 5 feet into it. And I just want to know if we can get some statistics from the borough that shows how many of these they're approving, what percent. I live along the river, and it concerns me that, you know, as we continue to grow in our area and there's very few lots left, and, you know, are we hurting ourselves? Are we hurting the impact in the environment, the fish? I don't know.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to make a comment too. Great minds think alike, Gary. I actually just spoke with Samantha Lopez, who's the River Center manager over at the Kenai River Gilman Center, and I called her tonight because I saw I've been meaning to call her earlier, but I had spoken with her a few months ago about, we do see quite a few of these conditional use permit requests to build a deck, or often a deck Kenai River Overlay District, and the borough has their 50-foot buffer, which is essentially the same thing, but only 50 feet. And she did say that was one of the things that she wanted. She didn't have on the top of her head, but wondered what percentage of land are we covering with non-permeable surfaces? And non-permeable surfaces are everything from roofs of houses to asphalt, actually to decks and gravel driveways. And these are things I actually didn't know that's all considered the same. And so it's not, of course, like a deck. My parents live on the river. Lots of people live on the river, and it's wonderful to have a deck, and you should be able to have a deck to enjoy your property and on the river. The question is not, in this instance, like, is this reasonable? Because of course it always is. In every single instance, it's always reasonable or often very close to reasonable. But I think the question is like, and Samantha's, what she always reiterated tonight is, how many rivets would you take out of an airplane before you were comfortable flying it? And I think that's, yeah, exactly. But how many little bites can you take out of the groundwater recharge and the ability for our little, it's actually quite a small percentage of our property in the city of, that abuts the river and all the anadromous waterways in it. So we can't just think on a per case basis. We have to think about all of the riparian habitat that we have in our purview. And so one thing she suggested and it may be that we don't bring this to bear on tonight's conditional use permit, but perhaps we consider it for future permits. She suggested that, or perhaps I shouldn't put words in her mouth, she's not here to speak, but what I think would be wise for the city and for this commission to consider is having similar standards to what the borough requires within the 50-foot, which is often this ELP, this elevated light penetrating kind of material for building decks. And I forgot, but it's not just the metal grate that Kathy and Russell will be using for the stairs, which allows 60% of light through. And they have all this math at the River Center. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, but this is just for our edification. That elevated light penetrating metal grate allows 60% of light through and can be as low as 4 feet off the ground, but it can only be 8 feet deep. So that's the kind of requirements that the River Center will place on any requests for deck or boardwalks or whatever within the 50-foot. And that's, I think, what we should consider mimicking in our 100-foot purview, because it's never, the 50-foot is not biologically, this is what was explained to me, isn't the gold standard. The gold standard is like 300 feet, or more accurately, based on the topography of the river. In some instances, there'll be a big steep bank and it could be 25 feet. But in other cases where there's a lot of vegetation or there's a lower bank or more groundwater recharge or a spring, you need more like 300 feet of buffer to actually protect the river habitat and the salmon that need it and the small fry that use that habitat. So it really is site specific. And we have to think about the cumulative impact. And I'm about ready to get off my high horse comment. But I'll just add that for this deck, for instance, Kathy and Russell would like to build a wooden deck, correct? Or is it dimensional lumber, or is it a Trex deck or Trex deck?
It's Trex.
Yeah, most of it. That's very noodly stuff. It's very floppy. I've built lots of decks out of Trex, and it's lovely stuff. And I will say that what the River Center would require if this were in their purview would be just additional spacing between boards. So for instance, if you're building your deck out of 2x6 Trex, it would require, it depends on whether it's, for this, it would be dimensional lumber. So it'd be 1.85 inches between boards. And that will allow for a 25% light to penetrate the deck. And because it's only 25% of light getting through, the borough requires that it be 18 feet off the ground, and it can only be 6 feet deep. So that's the kind of requirements that the borough has decided are what will keep our riparian areas healthy, and provide the most flexibility to property owners to do what they want with their property, but still allow for the groundwater recharge and the riparian habitat to thrive so that, you know, the salmon can thrive and all that jazz. So I would like to consider that we add a condition for approval, a sixth condition for approval, that we just require the same kind of spacing between deck boards that the River Center would require, just so there's a little bit of light penetration. And that is sort of a happy, I think, a happy compromise for this particular case. Hopefully it isn't too egregious for the homeowners to accommodate, and that it, I think, meets the intention of our Kenai River Overlay District. And then for the future, I'd love us to really look at mimicking the same requirements that the borough has for their 50-foot. Thank you.
Madam Chair, just a clarification. So if this is within the overlay district and the borough's side of things, wouldn't their requirements be there anyway? We don't have to add to it?
No, because our purview is 100 feet buffer and the borough's is only 50 feet.
Oh, I'm just saying in this
Oh.
specific case, they were within 45 feet, so they're going to trigger, if I'm understanding correctly, the borough's.
But just
Side of
that,
things.
just the stairs up to their deck. So that's why their stairs are that elevated light penetrating material, but nothing else is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments or discussion or?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding your condition that we're applying that standard to both decks, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
As long as they're both, yeah, my understanding is that they're both fully within our 100-foot purview. Yeah, thank you. And it's different math for whether it's dimensional lumber or rough cut lumber or 2x4s or 2x6s, and it's all thought of by scientists who've really thought hard about this. And I think we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but should consider, just keeping with the good science that already exists.
I do have one question, and you mentioned something about 18 inches off the ground. Now, I believe that ours is going to be closer to the 30 inches above the ground, so it's not going to be that close.
Oh, no, thank you so much, Kathy. That's really good. It's good information to have. I may have misspoke. Actually, for a wooden deck to achieve 25% light penetration, it actually has to be 18 feet off the ground,
Oh.
Which is quite a lot. I wasn't going to impose that condition upon your request because I think that would be too difficult, and you've already put a lot of work into your application. But I think it's something for us as a commission and a city to consider for the future. There are the River Center has already worked out all of this math, and so it's on us to figure out how we'd like to implement it within our Kenai River Overlay District.
I misunderstood. Thank you.
Oh, no. Thanks for your additional info. Are there any other questions or comments for staff? Do we get the? Do you feel like the additional condition is clear?
Yes, Chair Vale, so, we have a similar standard, but just for walkways. So I would probably use similar verbiage that decks installed must have at least 25% light penetration.
Yeah, thank you. Do we need to vote on adding that? Yep. All right. So let's vote. I'd like to move it. Can I make that motion? All right. I'd move to add a condition that this deck have at least 25% light penetration.
Second.
Thank you. Can we vote on the amendment?
Vote on the amendment to the resolution to install a sixth condition that both decks must be installed, or both decks installed must have at least 25% light penetration. Turner,
Yes.
Burton,
Yes.
Murray,
Yes.
Chair Radla.
Yes.
I still do not see Smithwick, Ailey, or Anderson. You have 4 yes votes, 0 no votes, and 2 absent votes to amend the resolution. Motion passes to amend the resolution.
Thank you. And now may we move on to the resolution itself?
The vote on the motion as amended, the resolution as amended. Murray,
Yes.
Turner,
Yes.
Burton,
Yes.
and Chair Badla.
Yes.
Smithwick, Ailey, and Anderson are still absent. You have 4 yes votes, 0 no votes, 2 absent votes. The motion passes.
Thank you. Kathy and Russell, do you have any additional comments to make? We're so grateful that you joined us tonight.
No, I don't believe so. I'll call tomorrow and chat.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any new business? Sorry, looking at. Yeah, sorry. Thanks. Zoning ordinance recommendations for the riverfront rezone. I'd love to have a staff report, please.
Thank you, Chair Butler and Commissioners. As discussed in previous meetings, we're going to rezone the riverfront area first since the city has adopted that downtown riverfront redevelopment plan. I just want to give some background how I got to the preliminary draft is I really looked at all our adopted policies in regards to this area. In addition, reviewing the downtown redevelopment plan in itself, in its entirety, when it comes to land use, and the appendix when it comes to the draft mixed use zone. And also looking at the previous effort that your commission has gone through with the commercial corridor, because I think that was a little bit reflective of what you guys were looking at when you were looking at the rezone. So I try to incorporate all these elements and recognizing that not all aspects of the redevelopment plan can be incorporated today, considering that their streets are not developed. So I didn't want to put a burden on developers looking to buy land and develop to be so restrictive when there's so many more elements that needs to be refined. So this is really a really rough draft to kind of be a baseline, and having the discussion tonight with your commission of any things you want to just refine, add, omit, change, however you want before I really bring it forth to the public and do the public engagement and start getting feedback. So I will go through, and hopefully if you read through it, the way I formatted this was very similar to our zoning district standards, the formatting of it, the flow of it, with the exceptions of there's some design elements. The only part within our zoning ordinance that you see design standards are within our townhome district or townhome standards. And I provide some commentary in red just to kind of guide the conversation when you're reading this memo. And then the anticipated aspect of this rezone is that there's going to be a second phase and probably many more amendments as things get developed and as we want to have more standards specifically to this area. So the second phase I'm anticipating is incorporating more specific design guidelines or elements of a form-based code. I think before I incorporate any form-based code that was recommended by the consultants in their draft is that doing a work session of what a form-based code is, what are the pros and cons of that, and really understanding it so that your commission can make a sound decision and one that you can think, is this really the best way to go about it before I incorporate those things? Because form-based code, while it's very helpful on scale and bulk, it's very time-consuming from a staff to do review for very specific details. And
I don't feel comfortable doing that or copying standards that are more common in other cities. I really wanted to cater to our town and what we want to see. So I'll go ahead and dial from beginning to end. I just use a very generic district name. And of course, if you want to rename it anything else, I'm happy and open to hearing that. So for now, it's the Riverfront Mixed Use RMU District. With every zoning district standards, we have intent. I included the purpose just because there's a plan that we have adopted that has led to this district. So incorporating that, what we do for this district is to align with our redevelopment plan. So I'll read it verbatim. The purpose of the Riverfront Mixed Use District is to implement and support the vision, goals, and policies of the Soldotna Downtown Riverfront Redevelopment Plan, ensure future development is integrated, cohesive, context-specific, sensitive, and contributes to the overall district vision. The intent of the district is to provide a sustainable, healthy, equitable, accessible, and active environment. It includes a mix of complementary uses, engaging public gathering space, diverse housing options to a wide range of community members, and safe multimodal travel opportunities within the district and to adjacent commercial area, as well as the Kenai River and nearby neighborhoods. This language is almost verbatim to what was drafted by the consultants. I think that, you know, they worked on the plan. This summarizes it very well. And please just interrupt if you have questions or if you want to have any comments or edits, because I'm going to be writing notes. The goal of this is that anything your commission provide tonight, I will refine it and then just put that draft out to the community for them to start providing comments. The next section.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
I don't want to, I hope.
Anytime.
No, just, I'll think more about this and maybe send you an email, but I remember from the purpose, there was something about like the river itself and like maybe, anyways, that's my thought. That's the end of my thought. I will think about if there's something rivery, even since we just talked about like the river habitat and stuff, maybe highlighting the river or, and I'm trying to think, it was something about like the development and the zoning within this district should be like the real thing that holds everything together in this district is that it's next to the river. And then ergo, like we should highlight that somehow.
Okay,
I'll think
understood.
about that. I mean, it's in the title of the zone, so maybe that's all we need. But I feel like there was something else in there that I'll try to have a more helpful comment next.
No, I'll take note and follow up with you.
Okay.
So while purpose and intent is there, this further breaks it down to kind of objectives, because when you have a district where the standards are very generic for the time being, because really this is kind of an interim district to fill in, prevent certain uses that we don't want to see. When there's opportunity for interpretation by the administrative officer, which is myself, then I go back to intent, because that's how I do interpretation of the zoning code, is my interpretation aligning with these intent and standards. So this is why it's important to really make sure these purpose and intent portion is well written, because these are tools that I need to use for interpretation when code is not clear. I mean, a good example, you know, of some of our zoning district, like a multifamily, it says it's a transitional to be between a certain zone and this zone. That's a little bit too specific, because when you're doing rezone, that doesn't always fall into play. So that's something to consider when you write purpose and intent. So something food for thought. So I'll go over these because these are kind of what I've summarized and hopefully incorporating to further expand on the intent. So the Riverfront Mixed Use District provides standards to create a sense of place and identity, serving as a gateway to the downtown riverfront. These standards are intended to promote development that is consistent with the goals of the Soldotna Downtown Riverfront Redevelopment Plan, to establish a cluster of complementary retail, dining, and entertainment uses focused on the Kenai River, to incorporate public art, and this was kind of thought on about our arts and culture master plan, and amenities to enhance community spaces for gathering and cultivating culture.
Third, encourage a diverse housing option that is suited for changing demographics and accommodates the housing needs of the city's current and future workforce. And fourth, create safe routes, attractive streetscapes, and accessible public spaces for pedestrians, bicyclists, and motorists. So those were kind of like the 4 key areas of the plan, and I'm happy to add any more or revise any of these. You know, I don't expect a comment right away. You can think about it at the end or at any time. Yeah, any comments before I move on? Thoughts? The plan has a lot to unpack. What was that?
Uh-oh, this is deep. It's getting deep.
You know, it was a very hard sentence to write. I was looking at the arts and culture master plan. I really wanted to somehow incorporate this into this area. That is a good question. I might have to think on that, but if anyone has good wordsmithing, I'm all ears for. Because I know this area has a lot of opportunities. Okay, absolutely. I was trying for that because I wrote enhance before. Okay, anything else? Okay, I'll just move on for now and we can always go back to it. So this next section is permitted principal uses and structures. Again, I follow the same format that we've had, and maybe down the road we can change this format, but I didn't think with all the changes to change the format would really throw a lot of people off. So starting off with principal uses and structures are permitted, meaning by right uses, not subject to conditional use, and unless specified, they may be subject to other provisions of the zoning code. So here I did look at the commercial corridor and the efforts made there and kind of align that, as well as look at the downtown riverfront. So permitted uses within the RMU district would be assembly and concert halls, dwellings. You have your multifamily condominiums and townhouses subject to the provisions of the townhouse chapter. And then you have your eating and drinking establishment, your restaurants, your bars, your nightclubs, and coffee bars. Next, your financial services, including banks, credit unions, and savings and loans. And then you have your industry, your light industry, brew pubs. And then your lodging, hotels and motels. You got your museum and art galleries, offices, general, medical, and public services, parks and day use playground. And then your personal services to include art studios, barbers, beauticians, dressmakers, dry cleaners, fitness centers, tailors, and tanning salons. And recreational facilities indoor to include arcades, billiards, bowling alleys, skating rinks, racquetball and handball courts, and recreation centers. And then your retail sales and theaters. We don't have a definition of a brew pub, so I've included it here just in case there's a question about what a brew pub is. That is not in our definition in the zoning code. I think we all know and think what it is. So, of course, if you want to refine that definition. So what I drew upon, I looked at other cities that has a definition of a brew pub. This seems to be consistent, means an establishment licensed by the state where beer is manufactured on the premises in conjunction with a restaurant, and where 25% or more of the beer produced on the premises is sold on the premises. Any questions regarding the permitted uses and structures? Okay, now we're going to move on to conditional uses within this RMU district.
Can anyone remember if we had a distillery as a permitted? Did you already talk about that?
It's going to be under conditional.
Oh, conditional, right, okay. Thanks.
Yes. So under conditional uses within this new district would be fueling, since we do have a gas station within there. And then boat mooring basin and launching sites, daycare centers, guide service to include fishing, hunting, tourism. You have your light industrial use, your breweries and your craft distilleries, and parking lot, a commercial parking lot, and then you have your outdoor recreational facilities, and then your repair services, schools and transmission towers. And then again, I'm adding definitions to the brewery and distilleries because we do not have that in our zoning code as it stands today. And I trying to think what the commercial corridor, when that was drafted, included these uses. You know, and that's a question for your commission. Do you see this as a conditional use or do you see these as a permitted use? And of course, at any point you see any of these use that should be just permitted, we can move them around. Okay. If there's no questions, then I'm going to go ahead and move on to accessory uses. This is a standard provision within all our zoning districts that they're permitted, which when they're clearly incidental and customarily found in connection with the principal uses and structures. And we have our accessory structures and then our home occupations. And then next is our prohibited uses. So this is a new section that's not common in our other districts. Sometimes I have found that saying what you're allowed is great, but when it's unclear or when you want to make it very explicit, then you create a section for prohibited uses. So there's no questioning if there's an interpretation of something. So a laundromat was included as a prohibited use. Personal credit establishment. So this is trying to consolidate the, let's see, the lending. What I think there's a couple definitions in the commercial corridor. So I try to consolidate the intent. And I think this definition makes it very clear what we're trying to avoid in this area. So that will be added as a new definition. And then throughout the riverfront plan, redevelopment plan, it was very clear storage unit, outdoor storage would be prohibited as a principal use. And of course, if there's anything other use that you know you don't want to see, that doesn't fit within the plan, that's not mentioned, we can add it here.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Because prohibited uses, did we enumerate them in the commercial core? Prohibited uses expressly? No.
No, you added new uses and then you put it in the land use table. But I don't think there was a clear section that said prohibited uses within the district standard. It was to be added in the table at the end of the section.
I'm just trying to remember, like, what else? I know there was an intent, like, I remember these things being like, yes, there are uses that we don't have and that we really want in this downtown corridor. Yeah.
Okay, I can look at it in more detail of things you didn't want to see.
No, that was, I mean, the payday loan kind of stuff, the pawn shops and payday loan. I don't know that personal credit establishment was like the predatory like loan kind of place. If that is clear in that definition for others, then
Or just kind of clump it all together. Of
Yeah.
course, I'm going to reach out to the attorneys to
yeah.
ask specifically if this, I think, is clear enough to say no. And of course, anything that's not written in here leaves up to interpretation is, can it be a similar use to other principal permitted use? If not, then it's prohibited, in terms of how things are interpreted. And so if there's a use that's not mentioned in our zoning ordinance and they're proposing something, as staff, we have to look at, well, which one is most similar to it? Is it in the permitted, conditional, or prohibited? And that's how we establish it. It doesn't have to list everything. And most of the time, if it's not listed, sometimes you err on the side that it's not allowed.
okay.
As well as just because it's in the table at the end of the zoning ordinance, the way our code is written is this text section trumps the table if there's
Okay.
any discrepancy. So I rather be clear here than the table, which doesn't have its own section, makes it really hard to find in our code. but that's a different conversation. But yeah, I will be happily look into the commercial corridor and go through probably the discussion of what uses were specifically. I did go through the draft.
It's
when
been
I
a long
did
time.
this.
I was just trying to, I think this is these three stand out to me as like, yes, I think everybody agreed that we'd rather not see these in the river, downtown area. But I'm trying to remember if there were any others that were like obvious standouts. And I seem to remember that the ones, that it might have been conditional uses for things such as, mostly it was to do with automotive, whether it was, I can't remember if it was repair or car, like dealerships or like the new
Yeah.
dealership in town would actually be outside of this district. But
Correct.
I feel like that was maybe one of them. Was it prohibited or was it just a conditional? thought
I
it
think it was
prohibited.
prohibited, and the reason why it was not mentioned in here, so why these are specifically prohibited use, because it's technically not in our table. So even though I don't list everything in the table, they're going to be prohibited. So if it's
Okay.
not listed here as permitted under permitted use or conditional use, it's pretty much, if it's on the table, it's going to be prohibited. So
Okay.
those automotive repair
Oh,
stuff
got it. Okay.
is going to be prohibited.
Okay.
It's just the way it's structured is
Got it.
confusing.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to update the table and spend all that time. And then your commission tells me, no, we're going a different route. So we'll work here first, and then I will be doing the complete amendment to everything within the code that needs to be updated to reflect this change.
I have a question. On the last page, I think it was about boat basins. So is this going to say that they are permitted?
As a conditional use only. And that can change. I was following suit of the commercial corridor. So
I don't
we can remove that.
just assume not that.
Boat basin?
Boat mooring basin and launching sites.
Huh. Yeah, that'd probably be a cluster.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we have boat launches at just up the road and down the road, sort of.
Traffic. Boat traffic, vehicle. Oh, it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, absolutely. And I was questioning this one because in the draft by the consultants, there were some similar uses. So I was like, I wasn't here during that whole review, so I figure I'd just leave it in and we can talk, but I will remove that from the list. So it'll be prohibited in this zone.
Even just getting it permitted through the EPA and all the other XYZ organizations, take forever, but still, let's get it out of ours.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else? I mean, again, if something's glaring at you, just please let me know. Otherwise, we'll move on to, let's see, after prohibited uses, you have your general standards. Again, this is following a very similar format as our existing districts. So general standards are usually your area width, coverage, yard setback requirements. And these in the commercial zone has always been subject to parking, loading, landscaping. It kind of defaults it. I'm following the same suit as commercial to kind of let it guide by if they have to meet their parking, loading, landscaping, building, and fire code. That already puts a lot of restrictions. But if you foresee any setbacks or lot coverage, lot area and width that you want to specifically require within this district, we can revise that. Otherwise, the maximum building height follows suit with the commercial corridor that was done with 48 feet. Except I added on this provision because this was noted in the plan that the maximum building height would be 25 feet. The plan is very specific to a certain corridor that's been laid out on the plan. So I can't just say 25 feet in a certain corridor without establishing it. So I had to pick a parameter, a measurement, and I think measuring it from the ordinary high water mark was one way to provide that buffer. Because within the plan, particularly in the bridgehead corridor, like an L shape, says that it wants 25 feet maximum building height. So that is the reason why that is in there. I did not make that up. Besides,
putting the distance of measuring from the property line along the riverfront or ordinary high water mark. If you want to leave it there, take it out, I'm open, but that's why it's in there. Correct. And I believe that's what the plan specifically created, a certain corridor along the riverfront there to prohibit tall buildings. Yeah. I'm gonna let Jen pull up the boroughs map too. I did look at it. It didn't seem terrible. So I was aligning it close to what was proposed in the redevelopment plan of the district that they showed. And 200 feet kind of aligns with that buffer distance. And it didn't seem to be unreasonable. But while she's pulling that map up, I could talk about the other aspect of general standards. Landscaping standards, nothing is really changing to be consistent with other landscaping. I think that's another thing that as a commission and as staff to bring forth landscaping standards that's amended and updated. That way everyone's following the same landscaping code. So I didn't make specific standards when it came to this district, that it goes default back to our landscaping code. But here's the uniqueness is we can write the code however we want. If we want this district to have a higher standards when it comes to landscaping, more density, we can. But I just kind of left it generic in that way. And then this fourth provision under general standards was something that was written in the commercial corridor. And so I carried it over. Yeah. And then I did create a new section for parking requirements to really align with the redevelopment plan. But before I jump into that, I'm going to see if Jen has the map up to give you an idea what 200 feet from approximate ordinary high water looks like. Oh, the I remember.
Is that the estimate?
No. Yes.
Maybe even the park itself, maybe like in the middle of the soccer pitch. Ooh, no, yeah. Ooh, the grassy mound.
So anything within the 200 feet from ordinary high water would be capped at 25 feet building height. This is the discussion with your commission. I can draft it however, and we can be reflective of what your commission wants to bring forth to the public. And of course, as a commission, your decision may change based on public comment.
What's that there?
I mean, I think we would be hard pressed as a commission to allow like a full-on building any closer than 100 feet. Because we have,
Why not put it in code, just say 350 feet or.
Yeah, well, I think the highway is it's a really interesting conversation when you start talking about, because if we wanted, how far away is that? 500. Interesting. I haven't actually looked at all the discussion on this in the Kenai River Overlay District, but I could see a larger, what is it, 48-foot tall, like multi-use building closer to the highway, and then the smaller building in front, like especially not in the park, but like farther along down the road. But yeah, I wonder, where is that line where we're like, well, we really don't want the tall building any closer than this. I don't know where that line is.
How tall is Aspen? That one down the. Yeah.
Oh yeah, it is four stories? 3 stories. Such a good question. yeah, does that feel too close?
That'd be grandmothered in.
Yeah, but if it were like the gold standard for like our, multi-story building and we're like, oh, we really wish this were closer to the highway so that a shorter building could be where it is, then that would be informative. No, that's really only two?
With my mind, it's so.
No.
No.
No,
I
because
don't-
it's like 12
she's-
feet
yeah.
per story often, right? So it's
Approximately.
probably only like 24 or no, it must be like, who knows? I don't know.
I support extending to the ordinary high water mark. We don't do it.
Or do you just want do you want tall buildings of 48 feet within this district? We can write it the reverse where 48 feet is allowed only from the Sterling. I don't know, the other way.
Oh,
At the end of the day, there's different ways to write this. The
Right.
reason why with time, with amendments, if we decide to do foreign-based code, it would be sub-district, which the way it's written with their sub-districts, each district has height limitations. That's assuming if that's the way we want to go. But in the interim, you can measure from either the Sterling and allow up to 48 feet or vice versa.
River. Sorry, if I had to pick right now, just only because it is like a district all about the river. And really it's like, we want there to be this buffer of low-lying buildings from the river so that buildings behind it can see the river. But I don't know, I'm not and I do think you're onto something of like, I guess we really only have about 500 feet from the Sterling in most.
Yeah, so we do
places,
500
so
feet. We're pretty much saying the
really-
whole district. So, then I
Maybe
would just
250
be
or
25
3.
feet. What was that?
250 or 3.
And we can
think
always
that's-
change this as streets are developed to really better understand where development could occur. So, yeah, if you wanted to change it to 250, I just threw out 200. Like I said, I kind of use the borderline of what was provided in the plan, which is probably an estimate anyways.
Yeah.
Holding fast to 500. I could live with 4.
Any other thoughts on that? So what are we?
Right. You can be 50, make it traditional, you get-
It is hard though, because you have to, even if it's conditional, you still have to provide reasons based in your standards for why you're denying or approving the conditional. Because we don't like it. Oh, yeah. I mean, and I think you're right. Like it goes toward the. Well, but with the
Erase that
intent,
from the
like,
record.
with the purpose and intent, I think before we had like some verbiage around like integrates the river. And you could argue, like if we're putting up huge buildings so close, then we can't actually have all of the developments be integrated to the river because it, they can't see.
I think the one question too is, it would be a vision that we would have the large building that we talked about, public space. Or that's gonna be-
Yeah. And it's a good, sorry,
It has that space right next to, park.
Yeah.
That space right next to the park, that's that current parking for Wednesday market, it's already at a reduced elevation, so three stories, 4 stories, or whatever, it is, won't have as much of. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Are you measuring from the river, the horizontal?
Yeah.
That's the way our code has always been, so I would,
Good idea.
and I think if you measure 200 feet from that, I guess what most people would call as Davis block or the parking lot, I don't think it would impede on because we do have our riverfront meeting with the working group and coordination meeting. I think what we're envisioning towards that along the river is another open space first to connect the pathways. So I don't foresee a structure necessary within 200 feet. Maybe beyond 200 feet, it might exceed. So
You're excused.
I'd be in favor of extending that 200-foot barrier and essentially making anything above 25 feet a conditional use permit in that area. And just to give another example, the apartment complex next to the Allergy Institute, I'm sure that's only 2 stories, but when I drive by it, in my mind, it's so much bigger. And in the back of my mind, structures like that and larger are blocking our view of the river. And obviously we can't see the river as we're driving, but you can see the dip and the trees on the other side. And you have a sense that there is a river there. And the more we build up and up and up, we're going to start losing that sense of the river. And this whole riverfront development project is the spirit of the river. And we don't want to
Mhm.
block it out. And I'm done pontificating at this point, so.
So typically, a conditional use wouldn't be the appropriate place to allow additional height. It usually would be a variance, and being very clear on the intent. Or what uses would you see as an appropriate to allow additional height, and kind of being specific there. We can say, hey, for these particular uses, they can have a height of so-and-so, be or exceed the limit of within 200 feet. So maybe something to think about, what uses would you, like maybe assembly concert hall, buildings, dwellings would be the exception, public gathering spaces, do you see other uses
Yeah.
that you wouldn't want to see 3 stories, like an office? Probably not within 25 feet. So we can definitely add that provision. I would just ask that you're clear on what uses would be allowed for an exception to exceed that. And then we'll create a specific subsection.
I remember a lot of conversation around if it were housing, that it also have mixed retail or some kind of food, drink, that it be like a downtown with mixed use and not just an apartment complex. I think that's one of the drawbacks of that apartment complex is it's just housing. Whereas with this corridor, we want it to be like people moving about, going to coffee and then going home, but also like walking along the river. And to get more movement, you need more uses in there.
Yeah. We can again create another specific standards when it comes to dwellings, to have the first floor be kind of some kind of commercial use.
And sometimes it's like the top floor and you're like, oh, that's even cooler because everyone can go up to the top floor and have coffee and look out at the river. So I don't know. It's so hard. Like every time you're like, oh, well, I'll have it be at the bottom floor. And like, oh, wait, but it kind of would be cool.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that was incorporated in the commercial corridor. It was very confusing how it was written a little bit. I think the best way is, again, to create another specific
section for residential within this corridor, that the first floor is primarily dedicated to commercial use, and any portion that leads to the residential is kind of necessary.
Okay.
I think I can be clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay. So in regards to building height, does that work to create a subsection of uses, these specific uses may exceed the height within 200 feet of the ordinary high water mark?
I think we were talking maybe about from 200 to 500.
I know, so I kind of
Okay.
need a ballpark.
No, I like the, I like what you have there, 25 feet if located within the 200 feet. But then maybe there's an additional and if it's 200 to 500 feet or 200 to 400, it's,
Yeah, but we have exceptions to the height depending on whatever structure it is. I'd be willing to honestly go all the way up to Sterling Highway 500.
Okay, understood. Got it. All right, that's wonderful. So I think that's it for the basic generic general standards. So then I created a specific parking requirement to kind of deviate from our standard off-street parking and loading section, because this follows suit of recommendations within the plan that requiring the standard parking within our ordinance would prohibit development. So this section incorporates several recommendations from the plan itself. A lot of it mention reducing the dwelling units from 2 spaces per unit to 1 space per unit. And then in the plan itself, it recommended that for all commercial uses to drop down to a standard 400 square feet. I think our typical is 1 space per 300 square feet. So this is following suit with the recommendation to balance that, and then with hotels and motel to reduce it down to half a space per guest room. And this this is just following suit with what the plan recommended to ensure development, that parking is not the deal breaker.
Yeah, especially because we don't have that much space for parking, and hopefully we'll have on-street parking.
I don't
Yes.
I do this because residential dwelling, let's say it's a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend. They're each driving their own car to work.
Sometimes.
Some, many times.
Yeah.
So where's the other person going to park?
Well, and I think in this zone, the idea was that, that you wouldn't have to, this could be a place where people live who couldn't afford cars, or maybe they were seasonal workers and they were just coming to work at the brewery for the summer and they didn't need a car, or it's an elderly person who can't drive anymore and so they don't need a car.
So you're going to put restrictions on the people that live there, basically.
No, you're just saying maybe you have to park someplace else, or maybe there's on-street parking, but I think the idea is that if you need lots of parking, then you can live across the street. Or lots of other places in
And
town.
I'll carry it further, the hotels and motels, they have a space. Where are they gonna? When we have Wednesday market, Saturday, music in the park. We have a hard time with parking right now, and we're gonna lose the space supposedly in front of the Aspen at some point. So where are all the people gonna park?
In a parking garage that the hotel has to build somewhere else in town, and they make everyone valet park like all the hotels in Anchorage.
Good luck.
I don't know. That's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, this is a challenge with most cities, right? There's that concern of, we don't want parking to be the deal breaker, but at the same time, do the burden by writing a more not as restrictive code, you let the developer determine what their needs are. Because if people can't park, more than likely they'll be like, I'm not sure if I'm going to go there. I don't think that benefits them. That's always been the conversation I've had with big developers, is we know what we need, we know what our capacity. And hopefully as a city, we can work on building maybe a public parking structure to accommodate all these new uses. I don't know what that looks like, but I would hate to see, a new hotel come in meet the current standard, and then down the road, we have a big parking lot that now it can't be developed, and then maybe we build a public. So it's a hard balance. This is up to your commission. This is just what's recommended, that in order for development to make it appealing, this was the recommended parking requirement ratio. We don't have to follow it now. We can follow it later. So
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I- Because there's talk of developing the Davis block, which is like where everyone parks right now. It's like, well, if we develop that, we're losing parking, which we need more of, not less of. And so there was conversation of like, well, but why are we having this like prime riverfront downtown location as parking? Like, could we move that parking to the Magnum Motors across the road? Or could we just move it like adjacent, but not riverfront? And I feel like maybe that's also what a hotel motel could do. Like, there's 0.5 spaces that is, required right by the hotel, but then they have a farther away lot that's across the road or whatever. I feel like that's what all hotels do anyways.
You're gonna get people that are checking into the hotel and where do I park? It's check-in time, 3:00, and there's not a spot there.
And I would hope that they would do loading. So let me
Yeah.
just continue on a little bit because it addresses some of the additional parking requirements that can be met. So something that's new to our code and recommended in the plan is on-street parking, allowing that to be counted towards people's parking requirement. Furthermore, off-site parking, while we do allow this right now to some extent, it only allows off-site parking on the adjacent lot. So this is adding a new element of off-site parking, and then you're probably wondering, an off-site parking lot must be located within 1,320 square feet. Where did that number come from? This is the average linear feet of a 5-minute walk, and standard engineering for those who enjoy parking and all the nuance of code. So this will allow parking requirements to be met with off-site parking, not just within adjacent. And similar requirements, that's for an off-site parking on a private lot, that they'll have to record an off-site parking agreement. And of course, with the city, I'm sure we'll come up with some way to do so, keeping account of all the uses that's utilizing the public parking lot when we do have one. So hopefully that addresses some of the concerns there, how to mitigate. We don't necessarily have any off-site parking, well, with the park itself for now, so that could be included, but the question is, what if that changes? How does that change as well? So there's a few unknowns there. So do we want to keep this as it stands and kind of go back to it when we go through public engagement, or is there something that you would like to change before this is distributed to the public for comments?
I think some of the comments I made, you're gonna hear from other members.
Absolutely.
Yeah, is there a different way to calculate like the hotels and motels? Do they ever calculate on per 400 square feet instead of per guest room?
That's always hard because are we doing one floor? I mean, we could. Typically what I've never seen square footage for hotels, motels, because it's people stay based on rooms.
Right.
So that's why it's quantified that way.
Why did they recommend 0.5 spaces? I am curious.
I think they're just cutting things in half if possible, just with residential dwelling.
That's
And
easy.
with their analysis that they made, they were trying to figure out with what they saw with the existing public parking lot, on-street parking. They had this whole number of all these uses and how can it be accommodated with what we want, and then calculating parking. And so this is what was recommended to meet the growth of this area if it was developed. So
Yeah,
that was
I
their
know it's, like,
recommendation.
so much thought went into this 1,000-page plan.
That's why I didn't want to make up any numbers. I followed the plan because I
There
think
must be a
they
good reason.
in-depth reason for it. They're, and taking into account the on-street, off-street parking calculations. So,
Yeah, maybe there's a way that we could link to the, I don't know, especially for the places where we know we're gonna get questions like
Yeah.
that one.
Yep.
Maybe there's a way we could link to the page in the plan where it's like, here, this is why. Cause there's, I mean, I don't think, there's only been a couple places where we've, as a body, have had like, really gotten into some discussion, and maybe in just those couple places, we can be like, hey, this is a discussion point. Here are what the experts say and why.
Yeah, definitely. So this entire table, I will link it to the plan, that parking plan.
300 vehicle, large, anchored in. Looks good.
This was something that we talked about, probably laying forward on. It was, everyone at the table. All of that, you don't understand what a zoo parking is, and this is not Portland. And so I think this is trying to marry the two ideas, but this was definitely something staff really also had a hard time.
And we can always put a higher count and then put an exception for, if they need to reduce parking, a certain amount can be approved administratively, and then anything beyond will need to be considered by your commission. So we can do that. Well, as an alternative, we can keep this as is because it's recommended in the plan, and just know that that other concept is in your back pocket to utilize and refine as well.
Yeah, I think also this is like, gives the potential developer hotel person more flexibility in building, because there's not a ton of space. And if we require them to have one space even per guest room, like they might not be even able to build their hotel, which maybe is good. I don't know. But we just, we don't have a lot of square feet.
Yeah.
Maybe that means we like decrease the size of our parking space. We have like pretty big parking spaces. We do. This is a good point. Maybe we have more compact spaces. Yeah. I'm glad I wasn't involved in all the parking lot discussion. It's a lot.
Well, I definitely will link this portion of the code, mostly the table, back to the plan. I will continue further. These additional standards are actually, again, pulled from the plan. I only added on certain standards that I think is reasonable to apply for now. So when it comes to surface parking, new surface parking lots shall be located behind buildings and screened from the public right-of-way. In the event screening by the building is not feasible, the administrative officer may consider surface parking lots located along the right-of-way require screening. Again, I think this is the vision of the plan, is that you remove the parking away from the right-of-way and make it more inviting, more walkable, pedestrian friendly. And so the standard will ensure that parking lots are located appropriately. Next is the parking lot screening. A wall, fence, or evergreen planting is required between an off-street parking area and a street frontage. And then screening is required for new construction, paving, or repaving of anything over 1,000 square feet, and fencing of a maximum height of 5 feet. This is an example of very intensive design standards, which is good because sometimes when you don't have it, it's difficult for staff to say, hey, this is ideal. And so a fencing of a maximum of 5 feet combined with a wall and fence to not also shall be a maximum of 5 feet. And then a pedestrian access, break and screening, making sure that there's not a long linear footage of screening to ensure that people can walk through it. And then fencing material to be wrought iron, and the wall should be solid decorative concrete or masonry wall. So this is very specific. I don't know we want to go down that, but these are just pulled from the recommendation in the plan itself. So again, I can
link this particular design standards from the plan. And we can refine, omit, and keep things fairly simple in the interim until more things are developed in their area. But that's why it was incorporated. Let's see. And then parking access. This one I had a little bit of struggle with because in the plan itself, it talks about vehicular access is restricted to one curb cut driveway per block, which isn't feasible right now when our streets aren't really designed and redesigned. So per block is very limited, meaning all business on a block would have to share one curb cut driveway. So I limited this to one driveway per frontage. So if you have a corner lot, then they can only have access one driveway cut per street frontage. So you don't, which is good for traffic. I don't know. In my thoughts is when you have too many curb cuts, it's not pedestrian friendly because then you're walking and then you have to stop again. You have to walk and stop. So I think this is helpful because we don't have any code right now to prevent people from having 3 curb cuts, I don't think. So they can have any amount of driveway they want.
And so this is one per frontage.
Correct.
Yeah. Does that actually limit anybody's currently? Because I think, yeah, when we think about that little stretch,
Yeah.
Sorrel and North Country Fair, yeah, it is really hard to be a pedestrian around there.
Yeah, and this would just be probably just too new, and unless they re-establish a new use, then they would be subject to the standards. So existing driveway cuts will remain unless we are very explicit that we expect existing to comply.
Yeah. I remember doing did you have to do that? The DOT play nice with each other thing? Oof. Anyways, we did a whole kumbaya and there were like, 40 people there. And we actually played this game where we like looked at all of the curb cuts and tried to eliminate them. And it was like a lot. There's just so many. And so I guess my point is it might be in our best interest eventually to try to clean that up for safety's sake.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I almost hit someone because there's multiple access and yes. Anyways, I'm all for it. But I included it because I
This
want
is
to
also supposed
minimize
be a
it.
Stopgap, so like.
Yeah, and this is, I always remind myself what's the intent of the zone, pedestrian, connecting to a river, commercial, mixed use. So to me, this was added in here is for the pedestrian aspect. The next is just waivers and modifications, and maybe something similar can be done about the building height. The specific standards in the subsection may be waived or modified upon findings as such waivers, and this is a standard in other provisions of code that I copied over to apply that if they wanted to deviate from anything, maybe the screening, surface parking lot numbers, that they can go through this section zoning permit. I haven't gone through this process. I don't know what that looks like exactly, but we have this provisions for other sections of the code when it comes to waivers and modifications. And then moving on to our non-conforming uses, again, this is our standard language when it comes to non-conforming use. If there is a specific use that we want to allow to expand that is no longer permitted, this would be the sections to be explicit about it, you know?
Such as like.
I don't know what's down. I
Automotive.
didn't feel comfortable. I don't know all the uses vividly, so I didn't specify any particular use that you would want to see be allowed to expand, even though new uses can't go in, you know? I would advise your commission to really think about if you were going to allow a non-conforming use to expand to really justify it. But otherwise,
I can't think of any off the top of my head why we would want to allow non-conforming uses to expand.
yeah. So just a thought, again, we can write and craft this however you want. So this is the standard form language when it comes to non-conforming use paragraph. And then
Why, sorry.
Yeah.
What, maybe not about our town, but like what would even that, why does that exist? Why does that, code language, why do people use that
Non-conforming?
expansion of non-conforming uses?
I think our code allows up to a small amount, if I'm correct, by conditional use, which is odd. Just, let me pull that up.
Yeah, like if we don't want it, why would we want it to expand? But.
Because maybe they're thriving and they're like, we need that additional space for some, well, for
Okay,
example,
okay.
I've seen one where we had a business and they had to do upgrades to building code compliance, so they didn't really have a space, so they had to do a pop-out for the mechanical equipment. So technically, it's an expansion that necessarily is not compliant with the code zoning,
Okay,
but compliant for building code because it was a certain use that requires, yeah. That
okay.
it's a rare example, but our current and looking at our non-conformance code, it does say expansion, enlargement, extension of a non-conforming use or structure that could be permitted as permitted conditional use shall only be made upon approval of conditional use for such change.
This is
So
like a, oh, no,
if
we
it's
didn't think
strictly
of that.
prohibited, I don't believe the way the code is written that they're allowed to do so. Through a conditional use. Mm-hmm.
Unless it's, an example you just gave.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. Giving yourself an out, like, we didn't think of that.
Yes,
This
there's
is
always
that
that
section.
one exception to the rule. So,
Okay. No, thank you.
yeah, and then the last section is just violations. This is a standard paragraph that applies to all the districts. Talks
Mhm.
about violation and fees and reverts back to our fine schedule.
Okay.
Nothing new there. But I believe I got most of your comments and I will incorporate it into this draft. And then what I'll be doing is publish it or distribute it for us, making it known that's just a rough draft and to start requiring comments.
Mhm.
And then by the next meeting, maybe do as a resolution to hold a public hearing on it for maybe a first reading of the resolution.
Okay.
And then go from there.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The only, I just have one
Sure.
comment. I was doing some scribbling for the purpose and intent.
Yeah.
Maybe even just the words like integrate the Kenai River. I think you said like emphasizing a mix of, it says complementary uses, but maybe like, basically if there's a way to like, combine, basically making the development compatible with like the highlighting of the river. So let me see, incorporating like through the design of development, we want to highlight the Kenai River, but not that, better than that, a better sentence than that. Yeah, and I think like this is really good. It just this verbiage reminds me more of like a downtown corridor. Whereas I remember, I mean, I guess you point to the riverfront redevelopment plan, which is its own intent and stuff, but if this is, I guess I would love to have then as well as because right now the Kenai River feels like a footnote as well as the Kenai River. So I perhaps maybe somehow upfront saying the intent of this zoning district is to integrate the Kenai River to emphasize a mix of compatible uses like with the adjacency of the river. Is it? Sorry, I'm just like brainstorming here. But I would, yeah, I just want the intent to be like, no, the intent of this whole zone is to highlight the river and to connect people to the river.
I think I'm understanding what you're saying.
Okay.
I probably more than likely, if we scroll down a little bit, revise that first sentence, promote development, something integrating, the river.
Mm-hmm.
I'll probably,
emphasizing a mix of compatible uses with the Kenai River, or to highlight the Kenai River, or to integrate the Kenai River. I think we also did like something that's visually pleasing, but I think it's better to say, I think what we meant was like integrating natural materials in the design of buildings, which we already have later on. And I think what we meant by visually pleasing is like, we really want to highlight the river, and we want the buildings in this zone to be like, yay, we're next to a river. We're going to go through the extra effort to put some rocks and a timber frame up, or we're going to go through the extra effort to have pedestrian pathways that lead our guests right to the river, or so that's what I think we meant by visually pleasing, is actually to like integrate the Kenai River into the design and the whole, like, yep, I think I'm done. Good luck.
No, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for all this work. Really excited to see this come back up, and I wish there were more than just Mark and I here. But
Luckily, this is
step
just
one.
preliminary, and this
step
is how I would like to do future code amendments with you as a commission, that, staff just does the baseline and then we work on it, to not make it so formal as a resolution and then amend, that becomes too overwhelming and really hard to track. So this is how I like to go with bigger amendments. So I like it this way.
Really appreciate that. Okay, moving on. Information on the reports. Director Mitchell, do you have additional reports?
I want you to keep it short. Just a reminder that there's a vacancy seat C. That if you know anyone, please encourage them to apply.
Does it now mean that someone can live outside of the city?
No, this one has to be a resident within the city limit.
Okay.
And I'll probably bring it at the next meeting, because now with Charlene gone, she was on representing Planning and Zoning Commission on the Airport Commission. So I would need a volunteer. Someone to volunteer to be
Someone who's
on
not here. I
the
think
Airport Commission, which meets quarterly, the third Thursday of
Only
March, June, September,
quarterly.
and December. Figure I highlight
Who has
that.
a plane? Ooh, Tommy, you want to get a plane? I feel like
So
you just need to throw someone under the bus who isn't here and can't defend themselves. That's the way things usually work. Right?
I think usually that requires a vote, but so I'm going to take volunteers if there are
Volunteers, right.
any.
Volunteers.
Otherwise, we'll put it on the agenda for next month for a vote. And then you should have seen an email from the city clerk to file your annual public official financial disclosure due March 17th. And then, Jen, if I can have you go to our current planning projects. So as your commission voted to recommend the public noticing signage that was enacted by council last month, which meant that we need to post signage for public hearing items. In this case, your two CUPs for the K-Rod this evening had A-frames in front of the properties. And within that A-frame is a QR code to project planning site to get more information about the project. And if you scroll down a little bit more, now there's a link to current projects. So if you click on that view current plannings project, the QR code will send you directly here. And if you click on one of the projects, further breaks it down. So this is complete transparency. People can get the information, project location, all the material submitted by the applicant is in PDF. Talks about next steps of where we're at, public commenting, noticing that's been sent, where to find the agenda, and then the last one with public comments and question. So this will be done for all items requiring a public hearing. That it's a standard reusable A-frame signage with a QR code that will always take it back to this homepage. So I just want to share with you, and if anyone and you can share with other people who wants to be in the know of things that go as public hearing. Because I know the meeting agenda portal is not the most user-friendly. And usually by then, we're holding a meeting. This allows them to really look at it in depth and do their homework beforehand. Yep. I use the news feed portion of the website and it highlights it this way. Luckily, I don't think we do too many public hearings. But I think transparency is so important in giving people access to it. And now we can just say, here's the QR code. They can look at everything and we don't have to take phone calls, or if we're on the call, we can just bring them here and tell them to look at the plans. So this, I think, will save time in different ways. Yes, that has not changed. And if there's any other mechanism to improve public notification, I'm still looking at it, we'll see how this improves, and I will be hoping to do a press release on it on the A-frames. It's in order right now. It will be reflective as well, the background, so you can see it, to get the word out and get people in this mindset. And we are revamping the public notice mailers to no longer be a trifold letter. That'll be a half sheet postcard. So that's all I have to keep it short. But if you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you for all the work, both of you, and Happy New Year.
Yeah, likewise, thank you so much. It's really exciting to see all this coming forward, and I know it's a lot of work. Appreciate it. And with that, we'll conclude our meeting.